When I arrived at the restaurant for my daughter's wedding, the groom rolled his eyes and muttered, "Oh no, that old man's here again." But then his father's eyes opened wide, and he whispered, "Is it really him?" All the waiters hid in the shadows, and the guests were stunned. They finally understood who I really was, and that day became not only my daughter's wedding day, but the day justice prevailed. Before continuing, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment about the time where you are right now. Interesting place. A bit old-fashioned, isn't it? Leland Harrington stood in my doorway, scanning the hardwood floors and vintage wallpaper with the expression of someone examining a museum piece. His expensive, casual, wear-pressed khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget seemed to announce his discomfort at being there. "We like it here," I said, forcing a smile as I stepped aside to let him in. "Patrick grew up in this house." My daughter emerged from the kitchen, radiant in her blue summer dress, nervously touching her engagement ring. "Leland, is this okay with you?" He kissed her cheek, while I noticed he barely returned the gesture. After all, the GPS was having trouble with this neighborhood. He took another look around, taking in the family photos that littered the hallway, the worn but good quality furniture my late wife and I had collected over the decades. "People of your generation generally don't understand current trends in interior design." The words hit me like a slap, spoken with such casual disdain that I almost didn't feel the sting. Beatrix's face flushed. "Dad's been cooking all morning. Come on, let's go eat." I'd spent hours preparing rosemary lamb chops, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread. The dining room table gleamed with my finest china, the cloth napkins neatly folded. Leland sat down in his chair as if doing us a favor, then immediately checked his phone. "So, Leland," I began setting the plates. "Beatrix told me you work in finance, investment consulting, high level, portfolio management." He cut his lamb with surgical precision, took a small bite, and put down his fork. "Complex issues require an understanding of market dynamics that, well, most people your age wouldn't understand." Beatrix quickly intervened. "That is very financially savvy, actually. He's always given me great advice about ICO." "Imagine," Leland said with a thin smile. "Different generations, different approaches. Nothing wrong with keeping it simple." "Simple," he said, as if my life-as work was a children's lemonade stand. I watched him push the food around on his plate, taking tiny bites as if he was afraid of contaminating himself. The man my daughter loved couldn't even pretend to enjoy the food he'd put his heart into. "This house has so much character," Beatrice said, desperately trying to steer the conversation towards something more positive. "The original molding, the bay windows." Leland looked at his watch. "It could use an update, though. These older houses, antiquated electrical wiring, probably something wrong with the walls. When we get married, we'll definitely want something more modern. Contemporary design, smart home features. When we get married, not if, when," he said, as if my daughter's future were already decided and her childhood home already doomed. I refilled his glass of water, even though he hadn't asked for it. "Have you thought about the wedding yet? Any ideas for the venue?" Beatrix's eyes lit up. "Oh yeah, we've been looking at the best places in town," Leland chimed in. "Money's no object, of course. We want something that adequately reflects our status." "Our status." I noticed he said "our," but he looked only at me when he said it, as if establishing dominion over some imagined territory. The fog outside my windows was thickening. Typical San Francisco sunset. Inside, the temperature seemed to be dropping as well. I served dessert, my homemade apple pie, and watched Leland take a polite bite before abandoning it completely. "Well," he said, looking at his phone again, "I guess we should discuss the practical details. Planning, guest list, that sort of thing." His tone suggested we were negotiating a business merger rather than celebrating love. I looked at my daughter, who was still trying to keep the conversation going, trying to make it work. Her happiness mattered more than my wounded pride, but something cold settled in my chest, a calculation beginning to form. This man saw us as obstacles to overcome, problems to solve, outdated scenery to replace. He'd made that much clear. What he didn't know was that some old things have sharp edges when handled carelessly. The conversation turned to wedding venues. Beatrice mentioned places she'd seen online. Perfect timing for my next move. I know a wonderful restaurant for weddings, I said, clearing away the last plates. Reasonable prices, but excellent quality. The chef there does wonders for a reasonable price. Leland's fork hit his dessert plate. We're not. Because the wedding will be at my father's restaurant, Harrington's Prime, the best place in town. His voice rose to octaves. Beatrice almost spilled her coffee. Leland, calm down. Dad was just trying to help. Help? He stood up so abruptly the chair scraped the wood. Your father thinks we need help finding a reasonable place. Do you realize what kind of insult that is? I kept my voice calm, curious. I'm sorry. I didn't know your family was in the restaurant business. Not just any restaurant, he breathed. His chest puffed out like a rooster defending its territory. Harrington's Prime. 5-star restaurant. We've hosted governors, tech executives, international dignitaries. The wedding industry calls on us when it wants true luxury. That sounds impressive, I said, genuinely interested. And where exactly is it located? In the downtown financial district, at the corner of Montgomery and Bush. Pride radiated from every word. My father built that empire from nothing. He started with a small bistro 30 years ago. Now we're the preeminent fine dining destination in Northern California. Beatrice shot warning glances between the two of us, but I continued carefully. Your father must be quite the businessman. How many employees does a place like that require? Menos 47 full-time employees. Executive chef recruited from New York. Sommelier trained in France. Multilingual front-of-house staff. Every detail was thrown out like ammunition. The kitchen alone cost more to build than most people earn in 5 years. And you take care of the day-to-day work, I said. I handled the commercial side, financial planning, investment strategies, negotiation with suppliers. His earlier condescension turned into aggressive pride. Someone has to keep the accounts when you run a multi-million-dollar operation. Multi-million-dollar company, 47 employees. Downtown location, the numbers were adding up in my head, painting a picture that I found very interesting. Fascinating, I said. I imagine the overhead must be enormous. And what about rent in that area? Leland laughed, but with a sharp edge. We don't pay rent. We bought the building in 2019. No bank loans, no investors, pure family money. Pure family money. I kept that detail carefully. Beatrice had fallen silent, watching the exchange with growing unease. She could sense the undercurrents between us, the way two men measured each other, but she couldn't know what I was really calculating. Well, it sounds like Beatrice will have quite the celebration. I'm sure her father's restaurant will host exactly the kind of wedding she deserves. Exactly. Leland smoothed down his polo shirt, satisfied with having established the hierarchy. The Harrington name carries weight in this town. Quality, tradition, excellence, things that matter. Things that matter. Unlike seemingly reasonable prices. Unlike this antiquated house where his future wife grew up happy and loved. I could see he was finished with us, ready to return to his well-bred, contemporary world. The meal, in his mind, was over, though my homemade cake remained barely touched on his plate. Speaking of the restaurant, I said matter-of-factly, what kind of cuisine does your father offer? New American with French influences. Menus starting at $120 per person. Pairings not included. We're booked until December. He looked at his watch again, more ostentatiously this time. I really should be leaving soon. I have to get up early tomorrow. The fog outside had thickened into the typical San Francisco gloom, and I saw that Leland was already mentally out the door. But he'd given me just what I needed. Pride-fueled details about the family business. Location-specific information. Financial boasting hidden in conversation. 47 employees. Depend on Harrington's Prime for a living. A multi-million-dollar operation. With cash paid for the establishment. Very impressive. And if something goes wrong, very vulnerable. Thanks for coming. It was informative, I said. Well, I should go, Leland replied, jumping to his feet and already reaching for his jacket. The afternoon fog had settled thickly outside the windows. He seemed anxious to escape before it got worse. The farewell was awkward. A polite handshake with me, an absent-minded kiss to Beatrice on the cheek. I'll call you tomorrow for the details about the venue, he told her, heading for the door. We need to finalize dates soon. I watched him get into the black car from the porch. Of course, it was a BMW, and he drove off with unnecessary acceleration. The taillights disappeared into the fog in seconds, leaving only the faint smell of expensive exhaust. Beatrice stayed by my side, hugging herself against the cold. I'm sorry about Leland, she said quietly. He's very protective of the family business. Sometimes he gets defensive when people suggest reasonable alternatives. Come on, Dad, she said, playing it cool. It wasn't that bad. Your father worked very hard to build that restaurant. They're proud of what they've achieved. I understand pride, I said, leading her inside, where the warmth awaited her. But pride and arrogance aren't the same thing. We settled into the living room. The lamplight was softer, more forgiving. Beatrice curled up in the corner of the sofa she had occupied as a child when we had serious conversations. He made you feel small, he said finally. I could see that. The way he talked about the house, about your suggestions. His voice was thick with embarrassment. I tried to steer the conversation back, but he wouldn't stop. Beatrice. Fille. I sat across from her, leaning forward. I need you to do something for me, and I need you not to ask me questions for now. His eyebrows raised. What kind of thing? Don't tell him anything about my job, where I work, what I do. Keep that information private for now. Dad, he already thinks you're a retiree who just hangs around the house. Why should I trust you with this? Can you do this? She studied my face, looking for clues I wasn't ready to give. Finally, she nodded. Sure, he said, but you're being mysterious, and I don't like mysteries. Sometimes mysteries have good reasons behind them. A car door slammed outside. Leland's BMW was returning. Beatrice got up and looked out the window. He's back, she said. Probably forgot something, but instead of going down to the door, I heard the engine rev again. Through the fog, I saw him running toward the street. Beatrice, her bright blue dress against the gray of the afternoon. She'd left her jacket inside. I watched from the window as she climbed into the passenger seat. A brief conversation, gestures I couldn't read. Tente left this time never to return. The house felt different with his departure. Larger, quieter, but also somehow more purposeful. I washed the dishes as usual, thinking of Harrington's prime. Corner of Montgomery and Bush, 47 employees, multi-million-dollar, family-owned. Leland Harrington thought he knew exactly what kind of man I was. A simple retiree who didn't understand modern business, who lived in an old-fashioned house and made naive suggestions about reasonable prices. A man whose daughter had risen from modest beginnings to achieve a prize. I had no idea that some old things are more dangerous than they appear. I dried the last plate and went upstairs to my office. Time to do some research on the Harrington family, out of pure curiosity, of course, just to better understand my future son-in-law's empire. My computer came to life in the darkness. The glow of the screen reflected off the window where the fog pressed against the glass with curious fingers. The office felt like a sanctuary after the afternoon performance. 2 monitors lit up as I sat in the worn leather chair that had seen so many nights of research. I searched for Harrington's Prime, San Francisco. Their website popped up first. Glossy photos of perfect dishes, elegant rooms, testimonials praising the exceptional cuisine and impeccable service. That kind of marketing polish costs money. Confirm address, 847 Montgomery Street, corner of Bush Street, Financial District, exactly what Leland had said. Hours, Tuesday to Saturday, las 5:30, página M2 10:30. Closed. Tenta. Menus start at $120 per person, as is. But websites lie. Reviews tell different stories. I clicked on Yelp, Google, OpenTable. The pattern emerged quickly. Too quickly for comfort. Mixed reviews, but trending negatively over the past 6 months. Complaints of slow service, overpriced and mediocre food. Staff with an attitude that they were doing the customer a favor. I waited 45 minutes for my appetizers. Read one recent review. The steak arrived cold and overcooked. When I mentioned this, the server rolled his eyes and said the kitchen was backed up. Never again. Another nice space. Terrible execution. The server disappeared for 20 minutes. The food was lukewarm upon arrival. For those prices, unacceptable. I took out a yellow legal pad. Old note-taking habits. I started writing consistent service complaints. Declining food quality over the past year. Staff attitude described as dismissive or indifferent. Maybe they were fake reviews from competitors. Maybe dissatisfied customers with unrealistic expectations. But the patterns were too specific. Specific dishes, specific servers, specific dates. It wasn't a coordinated attack. It was a declining business. My pen hit the desk as I read more. The health department's report on the city website. 2 violations in 8 months. Improper storage temperatures. Insufficient hand-washing stations. Minor violations, but telling. Good restaurants don't accumulate violations. Leland had painted a picture of culinary excellence, of 5-star dining and governors celebrating there. The evidence suggested otherwise. A restaurant clinging to the reputation of the past, while its current operations crumbled. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. This wasn't just about the location for my daughter's wedding anymore. It was about a future with a man whose family business might be built on quicksand. The computer clock. Read 5:30 p.m. Dinner time for many, but Harrington's Prime didn't open until Tuesday. I had 2 days to decide. Investigate further or trust that the negative reviews were rare. 2 days to choose between being a protective father or a nosy old man. I closed the laptop with a soft click, but I already had the address memorized. 847 Montgomery Street. Maybe it was time to see for myself if the Harrington empire was as solid as they claimed. Monday passed like a guilty conscience. I replayed Saturday lunch over and over again, analyzing every condescending comment and dismissive gesture. As evening fell, I walked the 3 blocks from the Montgomery BART station to 847. Harrington Prime occupied the ground floor of a renovated 19th century building. The facade promised old-fashioned elegance. Brass hardware, etched glass, a burgundy awning with gold lettering. First impressions matter in a restaurant, and theirs was spot on. A hostess in a black dress and a forced smile greeted me. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "I was hoping you'd have room for one," I said. Her gaze swept over my blazer and khakis. "Acceptable, but not impressive. We're pretty full tonight, but I think we can accommodate you." She led me to a table near the kitchen doors, the kind of spot reserved for walk-ins the staff deems unimportant. Perfect, I thought. Better view of operations. The dining room was meant to evoke sophistication. Dark wood, white tablecloths, dim lighting, and glassware. But my trained eyes saw details others might miss. Watermarks on the glasses, small rips in the upholstery, worn carpeting in high-traffic areas, the kind of accumulated wear that suggests neglected maintenance shortcuts where customers don't focus their attention. It was clear that they were cutting corners on what wasn't immediately visible. A young waiter, probably a college student, approached with the arrogance that comes with working in a place that thinks it's exclusive. "Shall I get you something to drink?" he asked. But his attention was already shifting to tables with more potential. "Just water, for now. I'd like a few minutes with the menu." I studied the menu. New American cuisine with French influences, just as Leland had said. Grilled steak for $58. Lobster risotto for $42. Duck confit, $4.39. Premium prices for something that will be more than worth it. Execution is premium around me. The restaurant hummed with the kind of forced energy that comes from a staff pushing itself too hard. The servers moved with studied efficiency, but I noticed the pace was askew. Tables received appetizers, while others were still waiting for drinks. Entrees arrived before the appetizers were even cleared. The basic rhythm of service was completely disrupted. The couple at the next table discussed their delayed meal in increasingly frustrated whispers. 20 minutes for bread, the woman muttered. At these prices, this is ridiculous. When my waiter returned, I was already ready. I'll have the filet mignon, rare, with the potato gratin. Of course, he said, but there was something in his tone, a barely contained smile, as if my request amused him in some way. It'll be right out turned into 45 minutes. I watched other tables receive their food while mine remained conspicuously empty. When the plate finally arrived, the steak was overcooked and lukewarm. The potato gratin had turned into an unappetizing mess. "How's everything?" the waiter asked formally, already moving to walk away before I could answer. "Actually," I called back, "this steak is well done, not rare." He looked at the plate with theatrical concern. "Well, the kitchen is pretty busy right now. I could ask him to fix it, but it'll probably take another 30 minutes. Another 30 minutes in a restaurant that charges premium prices and boasts exceptional service." I thought about the health department violations, the negative reviews, the declining standards hidden behind the marketing polish. "Fine," I said. "I'll eat it like this." The relief on his face was almost comical. Clearly, most of the complaining customers were forced to wait so long that they eventually gave up. An efficient way to save kitchen costs while maintaining the illusion of haute cuisine. I ate slowly, taking everything in. The staff huddled in corners, complaining about customers and management. Kitchen sounds could be heard. Pans dropped and voices raised. The unmistakable atmosphere of a workplace, where standards had slipped and no one seemed to care about fixing it. By the time I asked for the check, I already knew everything I needed to know about Harrington's Prime. This wasn't a 5-star establishment hosting governors and tech executives. It was a failing restaurant living off its reputation while providing poor service to customers who were either too polite or too intimidated to complain effectively. My daughter wanted to hold a reception here. The thought made my stomach clench more than the overcooked steak. The check landed on the table like an accusation. $1.87 for mediocre food and indifferent service. I was reaching for my wallet when I heard a front door slam behind me, followed by heavy footsteps on the wood. "What are you doing here?" The voice cut through the dining room with unmistakable authority and anger. I turned and saw Leland emerge from what looked like a back office, his face reddening as he spotted me at my table in the corner. Other diners began to notice the commotion. Conversations dropped to whispers. He crossed the restaurant like someone approaching battle, weaving between tables with ill-contained fury. The staff who had been watching all evening suddenly found urgent tasks requiring their immediate attention. Heads down, avoiding looking at their boss. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, approaching my table with enough force to rattle the water glasses. "Have you come to spy on my restaurant?" I carefully placed the napkin down, maintaining the calm I had practiced for decades in difficult situations. "I just wanted dinner, Leland. Your restaurant has quite the reputation." "That's nonsense." His voice rose another octave, drawing glances from all the occupied tables. "He's come to cause trouble, to undermine our business." In some way, the accusation was so paranoid, so disconnected from reality, that I almost laughed. "Leland, I ordered a meal and ate it. There's nothing sinister about that. Get out." The words hit me like a slap. "Leave here immediately." The dining room fell completely silent. The waiters stood frozen, practicing and watching their boss have a public meltdown. The hostess looked mortified. The couple next to me stared openly, probably wondering if they should call someone. "Leland," I said calmly, "he's making a scene." "Maybe we should." I told him to leave. He practically screamed, his face purple with rage. "He has no right to be here. This is harassment. Harassment for dining in a public restaurant." I wondered what his father would think of this performance, what the other customers would be thinking. Seeing the supposed CFO of Harrington's Prime completely lose control, I stood up slowly and took cash out of my wallet, placing it on the table. The exact amount plus the tip. Despite the terrible service, professional habits die hard, and I wasn't going to give him ammunition by skipping the bill. "I'm leaving," I said loudly so the nearby tables could hear. "Thanks for the informative evening." The walk to the door seemed endless. Every eye in the restaurant followed my steps, some sympathetic, others simply curious about the drama. Behind me, I heard Leland continue his ranting to no one in particular about spies, harassment, and disrespect for the family business. The cool night air struck me like a salvation. I walked slowly down Montgomery Street, processing what had happened. Leland's paranoid overreaction, his total loss of professional composure, the way his own staff cowered rather than supported him at all painted a picture I was beginning to understand. This wasn't just a restaurant with service issues. It was a business run by someone fundamentally unstable. Someone who saw enemies in paying customers and threats in reasonable questions. And my daughter wanted to build her life with that man. Fog swirled around the streetlights as I headed to the BART station, but my mind was crystal clear. I'd gone looking for information on a wedding venue and found something far more disturbing. A prospective son-in-law, whose temper and judgment were worse than I'd imagined. The train carried me back toward home. I'd seen this pattern before in my professional life. Businesses that appeared successful on the outside but were rotting inside. Pride masking incompetence. Arrogance covering desperation. Leland's outburst that night wasn't about protecting his restaurant's reputation. It was about protecting the lies. The train dropped me off at my station, and I climbed the stairs to the surface. The fog was thickest in the residential neighborhoods, muffling sounds and turning streetlights into hazy halos. I walked the familiar blocks home, passing houses where families were settling in for the evening, lives that seemed simpler and safer than the one my daughter was about to choose. By the time I reached my door, my professional mind was in full swing. I had information. Concrete evidence of poor business practices, unstable management, and a man whose public conduct suggested serious character flaws. The question was what to do with that information. I walked in and the house seemed too quiet, too empty. I hung my coat in the closet and was about to flip the light switch when my phone started ringing. "How could you do that, Dad?" Beatrice's voice hit me like a physical punch. Pure anger sparked through the line with no greetings or gentle questions. Just an immediate attack from someone who had already decided guilt and innocence. "Beatrice, it's not what you think," I said. "I went to dinner." "He told me everything," she snapped. "He told me you went to the restaurant and caused a scene, that you humiliated his staff and his team." Her voice cracked a little. Pain and anger mixed. "I went there for dinner, that's all." I sank into the living room chair, still holding my coat. I didn't go there to spy on him or find fault with him. I just ordered food. "He went spying," she said, each accusation hitting harder. "You did everything to discredit his family's business. He trusted you enough to tell you about the restaurant, and you took advantage of it." The manipulation was astonishing in its completeness. Leland had gotten to her first, shaped the narrative, and established himself as the victim before I even walked through the door. My daughter, usually calm and rational, who weeks earlier had apologized for her behavior and promised to keep my work. Pride had been transformed into an emotional weapon directed at her own father. "Please," I begged. I distorted a meal. "Stop. Don't lie." The words came out between sobs. "Leland said you harassed the staff, complained about everything, caused problems for his father's business, and when he politely asked you to leave, you raised hell." Pleasantly, the phrase was so far from reality it was almost laughable, except that none of it was funny. "It wasn't like that," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the knot in my stomach. "I'm a customer. I ordered 8 and was about to leave when he saw me and got aggressive. He said I was protecting him from someone with malicious intent." Malicious intent. He used his words now, presenting his version with complete conviction. The speed of my daughter's transformation was overwhelming. This was the same woman who days before had asked me to keep my profession a secret, who had expressed discomfort with the boy's arrogance. "Honey, don't call me honey," I said, my voice breaking. The fury in her tone was unlike anything I'd heard from her before. "You've shown your true feelings about Leland. You don't want me to be happy. You can't stand that I've found someone successful and accomplished. That's not true. I want nothing more than your happiness. So why did you go to his restaurant to cause trouble? Why couldn't you just stay out of our lives? Stay out of our lives. The sentence cut deeper than the accusations. This was my daughter, the girl I'd raised alone after her mother died, the woman I'd supported through college, through career struggles, and through heartbreak. And now she was telling me to stay out of her life because a man she'd been with for 8 months had managed to convince her I was the enemy. Beatrice, I tried again. Please consider that there may be another version of events. Maybe. There's no other way around it. Her voice was final, absolute. I believe in the man I'm going to marry. I believe in someone who loves me. And if you can't respect that, if you can't respect him, then maybe you shouldn't be part of our wedding. The threat hung in the air like smoke. I stood in the dark living room, still wearing my coat, listening to my daughter's harsh breathing on the phone. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like curious ghosts. I see, I said quietly. Really? Do you really see it? Because I'm done with this conversation. I'm sick of your suspicions and your meddling. Leland was right. Well, Leland was right. Some people just can't rejoice in the success of others. The line went dead. I held the phone long after the tone disappeared, staring at it as if it might ring again with an apology, an explanation, anything that would bring back the daughter I thought I knew. But the silence stretched on, broken only by the distant sounds of the city settling in for the night. Leland hadn't just kicked me out of his restaurant. He'd kicked me out of my daughter's life. The weeks that followed moved like a slow-motion disaster. I called Beatrice's number 17 times over the next month. Each attempt found voicemail. Each message became more and more desperate. My texts showed up as delivered but never read. Emails disappeared into the void of her anger. Beatrice, please, call me back. We need to talk about what really happened. Baby, I'm worried about you. This silence isn't like you. Love you. Nothing else matters. But the silence was exactly like her when she'd made a decision. Even as a child, Beatrice knew how to shut herself off from the world when she felt betrayed. The trait that had protected her from the playground bullies now protected her from her own father. The house felt hollow without his weekly visits, without the sound of his laughter that once bounced around the kitchen when he helped prepare on Sundays. I found myself sitting down to places out of habit and then looking at the empty chair, where she used to sit and complain about work, asking advice about men who weren't worth her time, planning for the future that had seemed so bright weeks ago, the future that now included Leland Harrington as a permanent fixture. I threw myself into work. I stayed late at the office, took on tasks I'd normally delegate anything to avoid returning home to silence. My colleagues noticed the change but attributed it to normal stress. None of them knew about the daughter who no longer answered my calls or the future son-in-law who had poisoned the most important relationship in my life. 3 weeks of silence almost made me drive to her building. I sat in my car outside her door for 20 minutes, staring at her windows for signs of life. But what would I say? How could you convince someone they'd been manipulated when the manipulator had already painted you as the villain in their story? I returned home without knocking. May arrived with the typical unpredictability of San Francisco. Sunny mornings degenerating into foggy afternoons. The city unable to decide which season it wanted to embrace. I was checking the mail on a Tuesday evening when I saw the envelope. Thick cream paper, elegant handwriting. The kind of formal invitation that announces important events. Mr. Delbert Myers is cordially invited to the wedding of Miss Beatrice Catherine Myers and Mr. Leland James Harrington, Saturday, May 17th, 2025. Reception to follow at Harrington's Prime. I turned the invitation over in my hands, as if it might contain hidden messages. After weeks of silence, he had still invited me, perhaps out of obligation, hope, or because Leland had insisted on showing father how much his opinions mattered to him by having him watch him marry the man he'd warned him against. The reception would be at Harrington's Prime. Of course it would be. The same restaurant where I'd been publicly humiliated, where Leland had shown my true colors before a room full of witnesses. I laid the invitation on the kitchen table and stared at it while I made coffee. 24 hours to decide if I'd attend the wedding of someone who no longer spoke to me, to watch my daughter join her life with a man I knew would make her unhappy. 24 hours to try to save her from the biggest mistake of her life. The coffee grew cold while I planned. My professional mind kicked in, calculating risks and opportunities, considering all the ways this could go wrong. But beneath that, strategic thinking was something simpler and more potent. The love of a father who refused to give up, even when giving up seemed a rational choice. Tomorrow, Beatrice would marry Leland Harrington. I would be there to see it. Saturday morning dawned gray and cool. The typical San Francisco weather that doesn't decide the season. I woke before dawn with the invitation on the nightstand, the cream paper catching the early light like an accusation. Today would change everything one way or another. The shower was hotter than usual. The steam fogged the mirror as I let the heat work the tension out of my shoulders. Methodical preparation had always calmed my nerves before a difficult task, and this morning would be no different. Shaving with the grain, then counter-shaving, checking for any missing spots. Combing my hair without a hair out of place. In the dressing room, I looked over the formal options with the same attention I'd once given to restaurant reviews. Navy suit, charcoal gray, classic black. Today I demanded authority wrapped in respect. I chose the charcoal gray wool with pinstripe competent, but not ostentatious. The tie, maroon silk, conservative, but rich. Silver cufflinks from my late wife. A 20th anniversary gift. Shiny, Italian leather shoes. Every detail mattered to establish credibility with people who judged by appearance first. I barely recognized the man staring back at me in the mirror. Months of takeout dinners and sleepless nights had hardened my features. The wedding gift lay wrapped on my dresser. A Tiffany crystal vase, elegant and appropriate. Nothing to reveal my true profession or financial capabilities. Just a thoughtful present from father to daughter. The card inside bore 3 words. I love you always. I glanced at the clock. 8:30 a.m. The ceremony began at 2 p.m. Reception to follow. Enough time to get downtown, find parking, and strategically position myself before the crucial moment. Keys, wallet, invitation in my breast pocket. One last look at the house that had felt empty for the past month, knowing that when I returned that night, everything would be different. Either I would have my daughter back, or I would be gone forever. But Leland Harrington would finally understand who he'd been dealing with. I closed the door decisively. It was time to remind some of them that respect is non-negotiable and that some old men bite harder than they expect. Harrington Prime had been transformed into something bordering on regal elegance. White silk fabrics disguised the rough edges I'd noticed last time. Strategic lighting created pools of light that hid water stains and the wear of the carpet. Wedding magic hid reality beneath beautiful surfaces. Quite fitting. I entered during cocktail hours and scanned the room for familiar faces. Guests chatted in small groups, champagne flutes catching the light from crystal chandeliers. The staff moved with unusual precision, clearly under strict orders to perform flawlessly for the occasion. Papa Beatrice's voice cut through the cocktail murmur like a saving grace. She appeared beside me in her wedding dress. Ivory silk with delicate details that shimmered when she moved. Incredibly beautiful, radiant with a happiness that squeezed my chest with protective love. I'm so glad you came, she whispered, hugging me tightly. I was hoping, after everything that happened, not even wild horses could have kept me away. I couldn't miss it either, I replied. You look absolutely gorgeous. Relief flooded his face. He'd missed her so much. I noticed several restaurant employees glancing at us. The news was spreading among the staff. That man from that night is back. The one who'd started that scandal with the boss. A nervous energy coursed through their ranks like stones in still water. Near the bar, where toasts would soon be made, I saw Leland chatting with an older man who must have been his father. Wayne Harrington had the same arrogant attitude as his son, but with the weariness of someone who truly runs a business. They chatted in low voices, gesturing to different areas of the restaurant. No, that old man is back. Several guests heard Leland's voice carry farther than he had intended. Leland's father followed my gaze and fixed me with a calculating eye. Is that serious? Wayne's response carried nuances I couldn't immediately interpret. Recognition, perhaps, or concern beyond simple wedding management. Their conversation continued in low tones, but their body language spoke volumes. Wayne's questions, Leland's defensive responses, how they both looked at me with growing unease. Whatever reputation preceded me, it was enough to provoke real nervousness. I stayed close to be playing the proud father, observing everything with professional detachment. The staff whispered among themselves. Some discreetly pointed in my direction. Guests began to sense the tension beneath the wedding's polished surface. Conversations subsided as they realized there was drama. Wayne Harrington straightened his tie and strode toward us with a purposeful stride. His expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. The moment he had been waiting for was finally approaching. Leland, behind him, watched with visible anxiety. He trembled at the conversation that was about to take place. Time for introductions. "Good afternoon," Wayne said, extending his hand with practiced courtesy. I watched the careful way he studied my face. "I'm Wayne Harrington, father of the groom and owner of this establishment. I don't think we've introduced ourselves properly." "Delbert Myers," I replied, firmly accepting his hand. "Father of the bride." "Oh, yes, of course. What do you think of my restaurant?" "I hope everything is to your satisfaction." The question hung in the air between us, carrying more weight than mere courtesy. The nearby guests leaned forward to listen, sensing the significance of that seemingly casual exchange. "Don't worry," I said precisely. "I'm just a guest today, not a food critic." The effect was immediate and electric. Wayne's handshake faltered. His eyes suddenly widened with recognition. Several guests who had been paying only half attention sat up. The word food critic spread through the room like wildfire. The staff froze, instantly realizing that their previous treatment of the man had been catastrophically inappropriate. Wayne began, then broke off. Diplomatic training collided with dismay. "Delbert Myers of the San Francisco Chronicle," I calmly confirmed. "Although, as I said, I'm only here today to celebrate my daughter's wedding." Beatrice looked at me in amazement, understanding dawning on her face. "Dad, you're a restaurant critic. That's your job," she said. Before I could reply, Leland appeared at my side, his face pale and pleading. The arrogant man who had humiliated me 6 weeks earlier had been replaced by someone who understood exactly the mess he'd gotten himself into. "Please," she pleaded softly, dread creeping in. "Forgive me. I had no idea who you were. I wouldn't have acted like that if I had." "I see," I observed, studying his face with the same clinical attention I'd previously reserved for overcooked steaks and pretentious wine lists. "Forgiveness takes time, Leland, especially since you're the reason my daughter hasn't spoken to me for a month." The reception continued around us, but our small circle had become the center of attention. Wayne worked frantically to manage the situation with diplomatic smiles and damage control, while the staff exchanged horrified glances at their previous service. Leland's hand trembled as he reached for his champagne glass. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." "Anything," he stammered. "What you can do," I replied with measured calm, "is treat people with respect in the future, regardless of who they are or what you think they can do for you." Beatrice linked her arm through mine. The revelation had just dawned on her. "That's why you asked me not to tell him about your work. Sometimes it helps to see how people behave when they think no one important is watching," I replied, watching Leland's face shift from shame to fear to desperate calculations. The man who had called me a nosy old man and thrown me out of the restaurant like a troublemaker was now begging for forgiveness without having earned it. Justice served not by revenge, but by the simple revelation of the truth. Wayne cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should discuss how to move forward from here," he said. I looked at my daughter, radiant in her wedding dress. Finally seeing him clearly, the choice about what happened next would be hers. But at least now she would make it with all the information. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thanks for watching. Think.